All right, let's get right into it. We are talking about one of the most high-stakes, low-frequency calls a first responder could ever get. An out-of-hospital birth where things just are not going to plan. It's a scenario that requires a totally different playbook, and it all boils down to the first 90 seconds. So just imagine for a second, this is what you see when you walk through the door. There's no time to prep. The baby isn't crying, it's not moving, and it's not breathing. Every single instinct you have from training for adult emergencies, it might actually be the wrong one here. What you do in the next minute and a half, well, it could define an entire life.
Now, this isn't just some dramatic what-if scenario. While it's definitely a rare event for any one EMS crew, believe me, it happens thousands of times a year. So let's actually look at the numbers here just to get a sense of the real scope of the challenge.
Okay, so check this out. There are around 62,000 out-of-hospital births in the US every single year. And yeah, the vast majority, they go just fine. But 1 in 10, that's 10% of newborns, is going to need some help to start breathing. We're talking about thousands of babies every year whose first moments depend entirely on the crew that just walked in. So what makes this so different? Why is it such a unique challenge? Well, it's because the fundamental physiology of a brand new baby is unlike any other patient you're ever going to see. The approach has to be completely different. And if you get it wrong, the consequences are immediate and, frankly, severe.
This right here, this is probably the single most important thing to get into your head. You cannot, I repeat, cannot just shrink down adult resuscitation protocols and expect them to work. A newborn's body is in the middle of the most dramatic, incredible transition it will ever make, and our job is to support that specific process.
You know, with an adult in cardiac arrest, the problem is usually the heart, right? The pump failed. But with a newborn, the problem is almost always the lungs. They're failing to make that critical switch from getting oxygen through the umbilical cord to breathing on their own. That very first breath is supposed to set off this whole chain reaction, and when it doesn't happen, the whole system just starts to shut down. So the priorities are completely flipped on their head. For adults, we drill it in compressions, because it's usually a heart problem. But for a neonate, the absolute top priority is ventilation. You have to get air into those lungs. Jumping straight to chest compressions is often the wrong move, because the problem isn't the pump, it's the oxygen. And this brings us to this really powerful concept, the golden 90 seconds. This is the window of time where a few basic prioritized actions can completely turn a tragedy around. It is absolutely a race against the clock, but here's the thing, it's a race we can totally win. So it all breaks down into 3 30-second phases. The first 30 seconds, super simple. Warm the baby, dry them off, and give them some vigorous stimulation. A lot of the time, that's all it takes. If that doesn't work, the next 30 seconds are for starting positive pressure ventilation. You're breathing for the baby. And then, and this is crucial, the final 30 seconds are all about making sure those breaths are actually working. It's all about breathing. And the numbers, they really show you just how different this is. We're not talking about 10 or 12 breaths a minute like with an adult. No way. We need a really rapid rate of 40 to 60. And get this, compressions only start if the heart rate is still dangerously low after you've already been giving good, effective breaths for 30 seconds. And even then, the ratio is 3 to 1, always prioritizing those life-giving breaths. Okay, so if the protocol is that clear, why is this so hard to get right in the real world? Well, the reason is that a nice, quiet training room is a million miles away from a chaotic, stressful scene in someone's home. The challenges are huge. Most providers, they might go their entire careers and only get 1 or 2 of these calls. There's just no muscle memory built up. They might not have the right tiny equipment on the truck. The environment is always chaotic. And maybe most importantly, there are often these huge gaps in the specific, ongoing training they need for this exact situation. And this data point is, well, it's pretty shocking. One survey found that 2/3 of pre-hospital providers had either never gotten the formal neonatal resuscitation program training or their certification was more than 2 years out of date. Think about that. The majority of responders might not be current on the skills for this super high-stakes call.
And that training gap, it leads to some really predictable, really critical mistakes. In simulations, those super basic first steps, like warming the baby in the first 30 seconds, it happened in only 2% of cases. Drying the baby, only 20%. And in a staggering 80% of simulations, providers were ventilating way too slowly. a massive error when the entire rescue hinges on effective breathing.
But here's the good news. These are solvable problems. We know what the hurdles are, which means we can design solutions to get over them. It really all comes down to training specifically for this rare but absolutely critical event. The way forward is actually a pretty clear three-step process. First, providers need formal training that's designed for the pre-hospital world, not a delivery room. Second, that training has to be repeated because we know these skills start to fade after just 6 months. And third, agencies have to make sure every single ambulance has the right neonatal-sized equipment stocked and ready to go. So let's circle all the way back to that scene from the beginning, that pale, limp, non-breathing baby. Well, in the real case, the crew knew exactly what to do. They stimulated, and when that wasn't enough, they immediately started breathing for the baby. And within 30 seconds, the infant started to cry. It worked. The right training at the right moment saved a life. And that leaves us with this final, really important question. We count on these professionals to be ready for anything and everything. But when a once-in-a-career call has life or death stakes that are literally measured in seconds, it just shows you how incredibly important it is to prepare not just for the common calls, but for the critical ones.